The hushed words, "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman," weren't a dagger to my heart. They were a dull, familiar ache. My daughter-in-law, Lilia, stood over me at the family dinner, her eyes glinting with a victory I couldn't yet comprehend, while my husband, Cedric, avoided my gaze like a criminal. Weeks later, I gave her a surprise that shattered her carefully constructed world, a quiet vengeance born not of tears, but of a chilling resolve. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned in close and whispered words so vile they nearly stole the air from my lungs. "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." My heart should have stopped, but I laughed. Clear, sharp, and startling. "Don't worry, dear," I told her with a calm she didn't expect. And weeks later, I gave her a surprise so devastating it left her shattered. "I'm glad you're here reading this. Stay with me. This story isn't over." I'd been married to Cedric for 43 years, 4 decades of morning coffee shared in silence, the gentle brushing of fingertips when we passed each other in the hallway, the long weekends spent tending the garden, or reading in the same room without needing to speak. I thought I knew everything about this man, his size, his smiles, his favorite brand of whiskey, and what made him cry at movies. I thought I knew my son, Judd, his warmth and his blind spots. I thought I understood the life we'd built in that large colonial home, with its ivy-covered walls and the faint creak in the floorboard near the kitchen. I was wrong. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind that should have felt comforting. The dining room glowed under the chandelier Cedric gifted me on our 20th anniversary. The table was beautifully set with my grandmother's delicate china, the crystal glasses catching and scattering light like little stars. Judd and his wife Lilia had come for dinner. The room smelled of roast and rosemary, and for a second I wished I could freeze time and stay in that illusion of normalcy. But Lilia had other plans. She sat across from me, her posture flawless, blonde hair pulled back tight, like always. Her green eyes sparkled, not with warmth, but with something sharper, something that cut if you looked too long. She was only 28, 15 years younger than Judd, and from the very beginning, she had unsettled me. There was something in the way she observed people, as if she were memorizing their weaknesses, filing them away for later. Tonight she was radiant, but it wasn't joy. No, it was the glow of conquest, of victory. Her hand kept resting on her flat belly, lingering just a moment too long. A silent performance. My son, ever the optimist, didn't notice. He was focused on his steak, cutting it with the same care and seriousness he applied to everything, his dark hair falling in that same boyish way it always had. And Cedric, my Cedric, sat silently at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly groomed, those once warm blue eyes glued to his plate, refusing to meet mine. He hadn't really looked at me in weeks, I knew. I just hadn't let myself admit it. "You've outdone yourself again, Mom," Judd said, lifting his fork with a smile that used to make me feel like I'd done something right in the world. "This roast is incredible." I smiled back, but my mouth was dry. There was something in the air, something electric, tense, like the minutes before a thunderstorm splits the sky open. "Mother Bessie is such a wonderful cook," Lilia chimed in, her voice all syrup and silk. "Such a devoted wife and mother, truly inspiring." She dragged out the word devoted, and I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "Thank you, dear," I replied, forcing warmth into my tone. Lilia pressed her napkin to her lips, her eyes never leaving mine. "Lately I've been thinking a lot about devotion. Marriage vows, really. You know, for better or worse, sickness and health." There was something almost gleeful in the way her voice danced on those words. Cedric's fork scraped his plate too loudly. The whole room seemed to freeze. "That's lovely, sweetheart," Judd said, oblivious, taking her hand. "Marriage is about commitment, isn't it? Building a life together." "Oh yes," Lilia said, but now she was looking straight at me. "Or sometimes sharing what someone else has already built." My heart stuttered, the way it does when your body knows something before your mind does. I didn't fully understand yet, but I felt the cracks start forming. I have news, Lilia announced, her tone slicing through the silence. Something that will change everything for our family. Judd leaned forward, eyes wide. What is it? She rose with practiced elegance, smoothing her dress. I'm pregnant. It was as if the air had been knocked from the room. Judd's face lit up with unfiltered joy. He leapt up to wrap his arms around her. Lilia, that's incredible, and he said, turning to us, beaming. Mom, Dad, you're going to be grandparents. I should have felt joy, tears springing to my eyes. I should have jumped up, embraced her, asked about due dates and baby names. But instead, I watched her watch him. Her eyes weren't on Judd. They were locked on Cedric. And the smile she wore, it wasn't for the child or the moment or even for my son. It was for me. Congratulations, I managed to say, my voice brittle. Judd moved to pour champagne, his words a blur. Lilia, meanwhile, glided around the table. She stopped beside me, leaning in as though to embrace me. Her lips brushed my ear. I'm pregnant with your husband's baby. You old fool. Everything inside me went quiet. My fingers clutched the edge of the table, white-knuckled. But instead of crumbling, I laughed. A clear, strong sound that felt like it belonged to someone else. Don't worry, dear, I replied, voice steady. Everything will work out just fine. Lilia's eyes flickered. She'd expected an explosion. Rage, tears, chaos. But I gave her none of it. She straightened up, rattled. And across the table, Cedric still wouldn't look at me. In that moment, something inside me died. Not love, perhaps, but the last bit of certainty I had in my life, in him, in us. Judd went on talking, rambling about nurseries and new beginnings. His joy was untainted, untouched by the filth beneath it all. And that, more than anything, broke my heart. How long had this been going on? How many lies had been whispered behind my back while I cooked, cleaned, smiled? I raised my glass, smiled at my son, and let the world collapse silently around me. Dinner ended in a blur. I spoke when I had to, smiled when expected, performed like a good mother-in-law should. But inside, I was screaming. When they finally left, Judd glowing with hope, Lilia throwing one last smug glance over her shoulder. I stood in the kitchen. I loaded the dishwasher in silence, my hands working as if detached from my body. Cedric appeared in the doorway, his face sunken with fatigue. Bess, he began, voice thick. Not tonight, I said without turning around. I can't do this tonight. I heard him sigh, then retreat up the stairs to the bedroom we'd shared for over 40 years. But I didn't follow. I wasn't sure I ever would. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen, alone, surrounded by the soft clatter of dishes and the ghost of the life I thought I had. The remains of what used to be a quiet, innocent family dinner still lingered on the table, and I found myself wondering, had I been living with strangers this entire time without realizing it? That night, sleep never came. I lay in our shared king-size bed, turned slightly towards Cedric, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, trying to make sense of the man lying next to me. Was he truly the same person I devoted my life to? Or had he always been someone I never really knew? Every creak in the walls, every hum of the refrigerator in the next room seemed louder in the silence, like the house itself was trying to whisper secrets I hadn't wanted to hear before. Morning arrived like a curtain being drawn back, and I moved through the motions of our daily routine as though I were on a stage, playing a character I barely recognized. Coffee, 2 cups, just the way we always had it. Eggs over easy, the yolks still a little runny because that's how Cedric liked them. Toast, whole wheat, sliced on the diagonal just so. He was already at the small breakfast table, sunlight slanting through the windows and catching in his thinning silver hair. I watched him closely like I was trying to memorize the lines of a face I'd seen for decades but suddenly no longer recognized. Sleep well? He asked without glancing up from the newspaper. Fine, I said automatically, a lie that tasted bitter the moment I let it out. The quiet between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, swollen with everything unspoken. Eventually, Cedric folded the newspaper neatly and stood. I'll be working in the garden today. The roses need some care before the frost comes. That same phrase. How many times had I heard him say those exact words over the past few months? I nodded as he walked away, my eyes tracing the slight stoop in his posture that hadn't been there a year ago. He was still striking in his own way, handsome in that dignified, graying way that had first drawn me to him all those years ago at a church social. But now I couldn't help but ask myself, had I ever truly seen the man behind the charm? Once he was gone, I sat alone at the kitchen table, cradling my mug of cooling coffee, letting my thoughts drift back over the last few months, digging for signs I'd missed. And they were there, subtle at the time, but now under scrutiny, they fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting for me to notice. 3 months ago, Cedric started showering at odd hours, not just his usual morning routine, but after working in the yard or right before dinner, even when we had no plans. When I asked about it, he said he didn't want to smell like dirt and fertilizer. It made sense until it didn't. 2 months ago, I came across a credit card statement. There were charges I didn't recognize. A florist in the next town, a jewelry store I'd never heard of. When I asked about them, Cedric told me he was planning surprises for my birthday. A birthday that, at the time, was still 4 months away. But I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I did. 6 weeks ago, Lilia began stopping by more often. Always when Judd was working, always with some excuse, wanting to learn old family recipes, asking for advice about marriage. She stayed for hours. And more than once, I found her and Cedric talking quietly together in the den, their conversations ending abruptly the moment I entered the room. Just talking about the garden, Cedric would say. Lilia wants to learn more about roses. Roses, as if Lilia had ever cared about gardening. I could still remember her complaining, not long ago, that having dirt under her fingernails made her feel like some kind of caveman. But now, under the cold clarity of morning light, those excuses, those shared smiles, meant something else entirely. I recalled the way Lilia would place her hand on Cedric's arm while speaking, the way she'd laugh at things that weren't remotely funny, the way Cedric's cheeks would flush pink in response, an expression I hadn't seen on him in years. I had convinced myself it was harmless, that he was just flattered by the attention of a beautiful younger woman. A little harmless vanity, I told myself, completely normal for a man his age. How naive that sounds now. The phone rang suddenly, dragging me from my spiraling thoughts. It was Judd, his voice full of excitement. "Mom, did you sleep at all last night?" I was too excited, I couldn't close my eyes. I kept my voice steady. "I'm still processing," I said carefully. "It's wonderful news, sweetheart. Lily's already making lists, baby names, nursery themes, everything. She wants to start shopping this weekend." He paused. "She mentioned that Dad seemed really happy about the news, said he got kind of emotional when she told him." My grip on the phone tightened. "When did she tell him?" "Last week, I think. She said she wanted to share it with him first. Said she was nervous about how you'd both react. Isn't that sweet? She was worried you'd think we were too young." Last week, she had told Cedric about the pregnancy a full week before telling the rest of the family. Why would she do that? Unless, "Mom, you still there?" "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. "Just thinking about everything we'll need to do to prepare." After we hung up, I stayed there, the phone still in my hand, staring blankly at nothing. Each memory clicked into place like a horrible revelation. Their private talks, his sudden changes in behavior, Lilia's smug little smile at dinner the night before. I needed the truth, but the idea of confronting Cedric directly felt impossible. If I was wrong, if this web of doubt and suspicion was something I'd woven from nothing, then I could destroy everything for no reason. But if I was right, the rest of the morning passed in a haze. I cleaned rooms that were already spotless, folded laundry that didn't need folding. Through the kitchen window, I could see Cedric tending to the roses, moving with deliberate care. Nearby, Marcus was trimming the hedges. His quiet presence had become a fixture in our lives. Kind, soft-spoken, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, with gentle eyes and rough, calloused hands. He rented a modest apartment above the garage of the Martinez house next door and worked for several families in the area. Cedric had hired him after our last gardener retired. Over time, I'd come to appreciate his attention to detail and his gentle nature. I watched him work now and found myself wondering, had Marcus seen anything? Did he know? Did everyone know what was unraveling right in front of me before I ever realized it myself? Around noon, Lilia's silver sedan glided into our driveway. She stepped out, glowing in a flowing sundress that hugged her slim waist, her blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight as she made her way toward the garden. I stayed hidden behind the sheer curtains of the living room, watching. She walked right up to Cedric, speaking animatedly, her hands waving expressively, his head bobbing in response. I saw her place a hand on his arm again, that same overly familiar gesture I'd ignored before. But it was different now. She laughed, tossing her head back in that dramatic, rehearsed way. And Cedric, he smiled, really smiled. A wide, unguarded, almost boyish smile I hadn't seen in so long. It felt like a betrayal just to witness it. Something in my chest twisted, sharp and unrelenting. They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Then Lilia glanced toward the house. I instinctively stepped away from the window, heart pounding like I was some kind of criminal caught spying in my own home. When I looked again, she was gone, her car reversing down the driveway. Cedric remained in the garden, but now his movements had slowed. He seemed like a different man now, lighter somehow, as though their conversation had unburdened him in a way I couldn't quite explain. That evening, he was almost cheerful. At dinner, he chatted about the garden, about things he wanted to plant come spring, and how thrilled he was at the idea of becoming a grandfather. His voice carried more life than it had in weeks. As I sat across from him, I couldn't help but watch his face closely, searching for some flicker of guilt, a hint of deception lurking beneath the surface. But there was nothing there, only something that resembled relief. "Lilia stopped by today," I said slowly, cautiously. "Yes," Cedric answered, nodding as he sliced into his pork chop with calm, deliberate movements. "Sweet girl, she's anxious about the pregnancy, just needed a little reassurance." "What kind of reassurance?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He paused just briefly, only a second or two, his knife stilled midair, then resumed cutting. "Oh, first-time mom stuff, wondering if she'll be any good at it, worrying if the baby will be healthy, the usual. The usual. But nothing about Lilia had ever struck me as usual. And more, this pregnancy was beginning to seem like the least usual thing of all. That night, lying next to Cedric while he slept peacefully, I made up my mind. I couldn't keep living in limbo, haunted by uncertainty, always wondering whether his smiles masked betrayal, if every tender gesture came with a hidden truth. I had to find out. Even if the truth cut deep, even if it shattered everything, we could only move forward if I knew. The truth, however painful, was better than lies. By morning, I was ready to begin. When Cedric left for his usual Wednesday doctor's appointment, I headed straight to his study, the room that had always been more his than ours. I climbed the stairs slowly, the old house silent around me, and hesitated before pushing open the heavy oak door. It gave a low groan as it swung open, and just like that, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The space looked untouched, preserved exactly as he'd left it. Papers neatly stacked on the desk, books meticulously arranged by topic. His old leather armchair angled in perfectly to catch the soft morning light filtering in through the windows. The scent of his aftershave lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the musty comfort of old books. I had always respected Cedric's privacy. Rarely, if ever, had I stepped into this room uninvited. Now I wondered what that restraint had cost me over the years. I started with the desk, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened the top drawer. Pens, paper clips, stray business cards from doctors and contractors. It all seemed innocent, routine. The second drawer held bills and correspondence, none of it raising any alarms. But when I opened the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a tidy pile of gardening magazines, I found something that stopped me cold: bank statements. Not from our joint account, no. These were for a separate checking account I'd never known about. The statements stretched back 6 months. My eyes darted across the entries, and confusion gave way to unease. Large deposits, $5,000, $8,000, even $12,000, appeared with no clear pattern. Just as strange were the frequent cash withdrawals, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, even one for $7,000. Always in round numbers, always in cash. Where had this money come from? Where was it going? My hands shook so badly I had to take multiple photos with my phone, just to ensure the images were legible. Then I returned everything exactly as I'd found it and closed the drawer gently, as though silence might preserve some illusion of normalcy. But I knew now something was deeply wrong, and still I felt like there was a piece I hadn't yet found. The rumble of a car in the driveway snapped me back to the present. I rushed to the window expecting to see Cedric's sedan, but it wasn't his. It was Lilia's silver car. I watched her step out, dressed in jeans and a form-fitting sweater that showed off her figure. But instead of heading to the front door, she slipped around the side of the house toward the back garden. This was it, my chance. I hurried downstairs, quietly positioning myself at the kitchen window, the perfect vantage point to see the garden. Lilia was walking straight toward Marcus, our gardener, who was raking leaves beneath the large oak. They spoke with an ease that startled me, their body language hinting at familiarity far deeper than I'd realized. I hadn't known they were even on a first-name basis, let alone close enough to speak like this. Their conversation, though brief, carried an intensity that drew me in. Marcus kept shaking his head, clearly resisting something, while Lilia spoke with urgency, gesturing with her hands. Then suddenly she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Marcus glanced around nervously before taking it and sliding it into his jacket pocket. Money. She was giving him money. But why? Cedric was the one who handled Marcus' wages. Why would Lilia be paying him, and what for? Before I could gather my thoughts, another vehicle pulled into the driveway, Judd's blue Honda. I watched as my son stepped out, smiling brightly. Lilia turned and practically lit up, striding toward him with open arms. "Surprise!" she called, throwing her arms around him. He laughed and spun her in a playful circle. "What are you doing here, beautiful? I thought you had plans with your mom." "I wanted to check in with Marcus about the garden," she replied easily. "You know, since we found out about the baby, I've been trying to learn more about plants." It was a perfect explanation. So harmless, so believable. But I had seen that envelope. I had seen the look in Marcus' eyes. This wasn't about gardening. As they walked toward the house, I hurried into the living room, pretending to flip through a magazine. They came through the front door, Judd's arm wrapped around his wife's waist, both glowing with joy. "Mom," Judd called, grinning, "look who I caught conspiring with our gardener." "Conspiring?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone light. Lilia laughed, a tinkling sound that always felt a little too polished. "I was asking Marcus about which flowers would be best for a baby's room. I thought we might plant a little garden for our son or daughter." Our son or daughter, the word struck me like a blow. But the baby wasn't Judd's, was it? "That's lovely," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Marcus knows a lot about plants." "He does," Lilia agreed, holding my gaze with something that felt like a dare. "He's been so helpful, so understanding." There was something in her voice when she said understanding, a subtle shift, a weight that went deeper than the surface. It made my skin prickle. They stayed for lunch. Judd talked nonstop, bubbling over with plans for the baby. Lilia, on the other hand, was quieter, almost withdrawn. Every so often her gaze drifted toward the window, toward the garden where Marcus continued his work. She seemed distracted, uneasy, far from the confident woman who had dropped her news like a grenade 2 nights ago. "You okay, sweetheart?" Judd asked, catching the change in her demeanor. "Just tired," she said quickly. "Pregnancy hormones." But I watched her face and I didn't see fatigue. I saw something colder, calculating. I saw a woman watching her plans begin to unravel. After they left, I stayed at the window, watching Marcus for another hour. He moved restlessly, kept glancing toward the house, the street, his truck. Whatever had been in that envelope had shaken him. Something had shifted, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what it was. That evening, when Cedric came home from his appointment, he barely touched his dinner. He looked preoccupied, distant. Something was cracking, and I was going to be there when it finally broke open. Face, surprise maybe, or annoyance, but it was gone before I could be sure. She smiled again, slower this time, because I thought Cedric would be more level-headed about it. Judd can be impulsive, emotional. I didn't want to overwhelm him. Her answer was smooth, polished, too fast to be entirely genuine. My heart was thudding in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "But Judd's the father. Don't you think he should have been the first to know? Lilia gave a soft laugh and set her cup down with a quiet clink. Of course, and he did find out. Just a little later than Cedric. I knew Cedric would help guide the conversation, make sure Judd didn't overreact, that's all. That's all. As if it were the most natural thing in the world to confide in your father-in-law before the father of your child. I nodded slowly, filing away her every word, every inflection. There was a rhythm to her speech now, confident, rehearsed, and I knew with absolute certainty that she was lying. We talked for another 10 minutes, the conversation winding through meaningless small talk. All the while, Lilia kept up her pleasant facade, smiling, laughing softly, asking about my garden and Cedric's recent back pain as though everything was normal. But I saw it now. I saw her clearly. The mask she wore, the careful performance of sweetness and charm, was beginning to slip. And underneath there was something cold, strategic. When she finally stood to leave, thanking me for the coffee and gathering her coat with graceful, deliberate movements, I watched her every step. "It was so nice chatting," she said, her voice sing-song. "We should do it more often." The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I let out the breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My hands were trembling again. I stood still for a moment in the silence of the house, trying to collect my thoughts. Every instinct in me screamed that something was terribly wrong. And then I made a second decision. I was going to show the documents to Cedric. I didn't know what he already knew or what he suspected, but I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Whatever Lilia was doing, it involved Judd, it involved Cedric, and it involved money, amounts large enough to ruin lives. I needed answers, and I couldn't get them alone. That evening, when Cedric returned from his so-called hardware errand, I was waiting in the living room, the manila folder resting on the coffee table like a bumpanunch. He hesitated when he saw it, then sat down slowly across from me. "What's that?" he asked quietly. "Something I found in Judd's old room," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Something I think you need to see." I slid the folder toward him. His eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, I saw the exhaustion behind them, the weight of secrets he hadn't shared. Then he opened it. He said nothing as he looked through the pages. Not at first, but I saw his face change, his jaw tightening, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. When he reached the handwritten list at the bottom, he let out a long breath and closed the folder. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since this morning." He nodded, and I saw his hands curl into fists on his knees. "I was afraid of this," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I just didn't have proof." "Afraid of what?" Cedric looked up at me, the weight of weeks, maybe months, of silence pressing down on his shoulders. "That Lilia's not who we thought she was," he said, "and that whatever she's doing, Judd's caught in the middle of it." He stood, pacing slowly across the room, then turned back to face me. "There's more," he said, "a lot more. But if we're going to stop this, whatever this is, we need to be very careful." I didn't ask for details. Not yet. I knew they would come. But in that moment, with the rain beginning to fall again outside and the secrets laid bare between us, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. I sat motionless in the living room for what felt like a lifetime after they left, the confrontation in the garden playing on a loop in my mind. Every word, every glance, every silence had taken on a new sinister meaning. My hands trembled as I held my teacup, the untouched liquid inside now cold, mirroring the chill that had settled deep in my chest. That smile on Lilia's face, it hadn't been surprise. It had been calculation, measured and deliberate. And when she spoke, every word was dipped in sugar, but aimed like a dagger. She had been nervous, she said, not because of guilt or fear, but because she wanted to ensure the family would be supportive before revealing the truth to her husband. She painted Cedric as a beacon of kindness, the protector she relied on. Words that sounded sincere on the surface, but hinted at something far more manipulative underneath. "Kind," I repeated aloud, the word tasting bitter now. She nodded. "Very kind, protective even." Then she leaned in, her body locked on mine with unnerving intensity. "He's been worried about me lately. Did he mention I've been having difficulties?" The way she said it made my stomach twist. What kind of difficulties? I asked cautiously. Oh, just stress. Financial pressure, she said smoothly, her gaze never wavering. You know how it is when you're young and trying to make your way. Sometimes you make decisions that feel right at the time, but later become complicated. Her voice was soft, almost confiding, but the air felt charged, like I was tiptoeing through a minefield, waiting for the next explosion. What kind of decisions? She let out a laugh, hollow and without warmth. The kind that require family members to be understanding, the kind that need discretion. There was a beat, a pause that made my heart race. The kind your husband has been very helpful with. The implications struck like thunder. My chest tightened. I don't understand, I said, though I was already beginning to. She stood and moved toward the window, gazing out at the garden like she was examining a property she planned to claim. Cedric is such a good man, she said, her voice airy. Such a devoted father. He'd do anything to protect his family, even if it meant sacrificing his own reputation. The words sank like lead, heavy and poisonous. What are you saying? I whispered. She turned around and the polite mask she'd worn earlier had vanished. What stared back at me was cold, sharp, and utterly in control, like a queen revealing she'd already won the game. I'm saying, she said, voice steady and cruel, that some secrets are more valuable than others, Bessie, and some people are willing to pay a steep price to keep those secrets buried. Before I could find the words to respond, the sound of voices drifted in through the window. Cedric and Marcus were near the tool shed, deep in a heated conversation. Cedric gestured wildly while Marcus shook his head over and over. Lilia's expression flickered. Panic, just for a moment. Then she turned on her heel. Excuse me, she said quickly, heading for the back door. I need to speak with them. I followed her outside, careful to stay close enough to hear, but casual enough not to raise alarm. The conversation halted the second she arrived, but the tension, it clung to the air like fog. Is everything all right? Lilia asked, her voice light but sharp-edged with threat. Marcus looked from Cedric to Lilia, his expression weighed down with guilt. I can't keep doing this, he said softly. This isn't right. Judd's a good man. He doesn't deserve... Marcus, Lilia snapped, her voice colder than steel. We've discussed this. Discussed what? I asked, stepping forward. All three turned to face me. Marcus looked sick with regret. Lilia looked irritated, like I'd interrupted a business meeting. Cedric looked like a man who'd been carrying a mountain on his shoulders for years. Bess, he said, voice low, you shouldn't be out here. In my own backyard? I kept my tone steady, even though my insides felt like shattering glass. What exactly have you all discussed that I shouldn't hear? The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Rain began tapping on the leaves above us, the only sound in the heavy pause. Finally, Marcus spoke. I can't keep lying, he said, meeting my eyes. Mrs. Holloway, there are things you need to know. Things about... That's enough, Lilia interrupted sharply. Marcus, we had an agreement. What agreement? I demanded. Marcus turned to Cedric, desperate. Tell her. She deserves to know what's really going on. Cedric closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were full of something raw and painful. Bess, he whispered, I never wanted you to find out like this. Find out what? But even as I asked, the pieces were falling into place. The secret bank statements, the late-night phone calls, Lilia's not-so-subtle threats. It's not what you think, Cedric said quickly. It's not what she wants you to think. Lilia laughed then, a brittle, cruel sound. Oh, but it's exactly what she thinks, isn't it, Bessie? Her voice dripped with mockery. Your perfect husband sneaking around with his son's wife. How cliché. I turned to Cedric, trying to see the truth in his face. I'm not having an affair, he said, voice cracking. I would never... He stopped, helpless. But I can't explain without... Without what? I pushed. Without destroying our son's life, Lilia said, finishing for him. Her smile was gleeful. You see, Bessie, your husband loves Judd too much to tell him the truth. About me, about what I've done, about what I know. The world tilted under my feet. What you know about what? Marcus stepped forward, pale but resolute. About the money, he said. About what Judd's been doing to pay off his gambling debts. About the accounts she made him open. The loans she pressured him into taking. Marcus, Lilia said in warning, but he didn't stop. The words poured out like a dam had finally burst. She's been blackmailing Mr. Holloway, Marcus said, threatening to ruin Judd if he doesn't go along with her lies. She made him pretend there was an affair to cover up her own manipulations. My legs wobbled. I gripped the fence post, trying to breathe. Cedric nodded slowly, shame clouding his face. Online gambling, he said. Sports betting. It started small, but now, Bess, he owes over $100,000 to dangerous people. Marcus added, voice tight with disgust. She introduced him to it, encouraged him, and when he was trapped, she offered help for a price. I turned to Lilia. She was watching the collapse with something close to amazement. What price? I asked. Silence, she said with a shrug, and cooperation. A marriage that gives me access to your family's money. Her hand moved to her stomach, resting there like a final dagger. And insurance for the future. The baby, I whispered. Isn't Judd's, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. It's mine. Silence fell again, heavy and unrelenting. The rain kept falling, but I barely noticed. My world, my family, my marriage, everything I thought was solid, was slipping through my fingers like sand. Lilia clapped slowly, sarcastically. Well, she said smug, I guess the cat's out of the bag now. The only question is, Bessie, what are you going to do about it? He didn't look up right away, but when he did, I saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. The worry, the regret, the sheer weight of what he'd done, what we were both now tangled in. I stepped inside, the folded paper still in my pocket like a hot coal. I wasn't sure how to start. My words felt like they could either shatter everything or begin to mend it. We need to talk, I said quietly. Cedric nodded once, slowly, setting the papers down without even pretending to look at them anymore. His eyes searched mine, hesitant, bracing for whatever I might say. I found something, I began, voice low, steady, in the guest bathroom. Lilia dropped it. I didn't have to elaborate. His face went pale, his lips parting slightly, as he seemed to stop breathing altogether. I pulled the envelope from my cardigan and handed it to him. I watched his hands tremble as he unfolded the test results. His eyes scanned the page, once, then again, before he slumped back in his chair, letting out a breath that sounded more like a groan. It's Marcus, he whispered. The baby is Marcus's. I nodded. Not Judd's. Not yours. She's been playing all of us. He ran a hand through his graying hair, then let it drop to his lap. For a moment, he looked even older than he had the day before. Then came the silence, the kind that settles so deep you can hear your own heartbeat thudding in your ears. I thought I was protecting our son, he finally said. I thought if I took the fall, if I played the villain, it would give Judd space to recover. I never thought she'd go this far. I sat down across from him, folding my hands tightly to keep them from shaking. She's not just manipulating him, Cedric. She's safeguarding her lies with evidence. She kept that test as leverage. In case anything ever went wrong, she could turn the tables on all of us. Say you forced her, paint herself as a victim. He stared at the paper like it might turn to ash in his hands. What do we do? I wanted to tell him, I wanted to have a plan, but the truth was I was as lost as he was. We were both caught in the center of a storm we hadn't seen coming, and now we had to navigate through it without destroying everything we still cared about. I don't know yet, I admitted, but the lies can't go on forever. Sooner or later, Judd will learn the truth. Better it comes from us than from her when she's ready to detonate everything. Cedric closed his eyes, the pain raw in every muscle of his face. He'll hate me. He might, I said gently, but he'll also understand, eventually. We sat there a long time, just the two of us, surrounded by the quiet echoes of everything left unsaid. There was no fixing what had already been done, no undoing the damage, but there was still the chance, however small, that we could steer it towards something resembling the healing. Truth, however painful, was the only way forward. Later that night, after Cedric had gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkened garden. the place Marcus used to tend so carefully. I imagined him back in his hometown, haunted by the mess he'd left behind. He hadn't been a villain, just another soul swept up in Lilia's storm. And Judd, sweet, hopeful Judd, he didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be lied to build dreams around a child that wasn't even his. But I also couldn't bring myself to crush that dream all at once. He needed to hear the truth, yes, but with care, with love, with time. As I watched the moonlight spill across the yard, I knew that moment was coming. It wouldn't be long now. The paper with the test results sat in the drawer by my bed, waiting. Not hidden, just waiting for the right moment, when the truth would no longer be a weapon, but maybe, just maybe, a path to something better. Her smile frozen in place, though her eyes darted between Cedric and me, silently calculating. I could see the wheels turning behind that carefully controlled expression. She knew, and she knew I knew. But she wasn't sure how much. That uncertainty was my advantage. I set down my wine glass and leaned forward just slightly, keeping my voice light, almost amused. Of course, it's not something most families ever need to worry about. Unless, of course, I let the words trail off meaningfully, letting the silence finish the sentence for me. Lilia forced a chuckle. Unless what? Unless there's a reason to, I replied gently, meeting her eyes without blinking. But thankfully, in our case, there are no secrets left to uncover. She blinked once, slow and deliberate. Of course not. Cedric cleared his throat, a quiet but deliberate sound that made Judd look up from his plate. Is something going on? He asked, eyes darting between the three of us. Lilia reached for his hand. No, sweetie, just your mom and I having one of our philosophical talks. You know how she gets when she's been reading too much. Judd smiled but didn't look convinced. Right. I stood up slowly, smoothing my napkin across my lap before placing it on the table. Actually, I said with a warmth that only deepened the tension in the room, this is the perfect time for me to share something I've been holding on to. Cedric shot me a quick glance, one filled with apprehension and faith all at once. He knew what was coming. I walked over to the sideboard, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the folded sheet of paper I had kept there since our conversation days ago. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking from the living room. I found this in the bathroom upstairs, I said, laying the paper down in front of Lilia with deliberate grace. Apparently it was misplaced. She didn't move. Her fingers stayed curled around her fork, but her knuckles had gone white. Judd leaned forward to look. What is it? A DNA test, I said, sitting back down slowly, never taking my eyes off Lilia. Seemed someone was curious about a few things. Judd picked it up, his eyes scanning the page. It took only seconds for comprehension to set in. This says, I'm not the father? Lilia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips moved, and still, nothing. The color drained from her face. Judd stood up abruptly, the chair scraping back. This can't be right. This has to be a mistake. Lilia? She finally spoke, her voice too calm, too calculated. Judd, honey, this is all just a misunderstanding. Someone's trying to confuse you. It's not a misunderstanding, Cedric said, voice firm but not cruel. We've known for some time. Bess just thought it was time you did too. Judd turned to me, his face a mix of disbelief and betrayal. How long have you known? I reached out, touched his hand gently. Long enough to know this wasn't your fault, and long enough to plan how to help you move forward. Lilia stood now, both hands on the table. This is insane. You're attacking me in my condition? I'm pregnant, for God's sake. Yes, I said, folding my hands neatly. You are, and you intended to pin the paternity on my son. You used Cedric, manipulated him with lies, and blackmailed him with secrets, but you made one mistake. She glared. What mistake? You underestimated me, I said simply. You thought you could slip into this family, weave yourself into our lives unnoticed, and no one would look too closely. But you see, I've learned to look beneath the surface. I've had years of practice. Lilia's composure began to crumble. Judd, are you really going to listen to this? To them? He looked at her, and I saw something shift in his face. A wall going up. Is it true, Wasao? He asked, voice low. Is this child not mine? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The silence that followed was heavy, but not chaotic. It wasn't filled with yelling or accusations. It was the silence of truth settling into place, of illusions being shattered and something real, finally being allowed to grow in its place. I reached out and took Cedric's hand, his fingers trembling in mine. Judd sank slowly back into his chair, stunned and silent. Lilia, still standing, looked around the room, realizing the performance was over. Her stage had collapsed beneath her, and there were no more lines to deliver. Dinner remained uneaten on the plates. The candles flickered, their light soft against the fine china. The family dinner I had planned so meticulously had not ended with laughter or dessert, but it had brought clarity, and in that there was peace. And as I looked at my husband, his eyes filled with relief and remorse, I knew we would endure. We had faced worse and survived. And now, finally, the truth was ours to live with, not hide from. The real healing, I knew, could begin. She kept her composure, not a flicker of emotion betraying the storm that was surely brewing inside her. Strange, really, such an odd subject for a dinner conversation. Or was it? I tilted my head slightly, the corners of my mouth calm but firm. Actually, I think it's quite fitting, I said as I rose from my chair and walked toward the sideboard. Earlier, I had placed a manila envelope there, out of sight but never out of mind. I picked it up with hands that were steady, though my heart was thundering in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum. It felt as if the entire table could hear it, though I kept my expression still. Returning to my seat, I placed the envelope on the table, the weight of its contents heavier than it appeared. I looked directly at her. Leah, sweetheart, I said softly, voice calm but unwavering. I believe you left something behind in my bathroom last week. Her face drained of color. Pale as porcelain, lips parted ever so slightly. I slid the envelope toward her, the DNA test results catching the chandelier's light, making the paper seem to glow, like truth itself demanding to be seen. Black and white, clinical, unmistakable. Judd furrowed his brow and reached for it. What is this? He asked, his tone confused but growing wary. Don't, Lilia whispered, almost inaudible. But it was too late. I watched Judd's face as his eyes moved across the paper. At first, confusion, then realization, then unmistakable pain, raw and silent, slicing through the room like a blade. No one spoke, the silence expanding like a balloon ready to burst. I don't understand, he murmured, his voice fragile, nearly broken. Marcus Santos? Who is Marcus Santos? Our old gardener, Cedric replied quietly, his words landing with quiet finality. Judd turned to his wife, searching her face for something. An explanation, a lie that could still somehow make this untrue. But Lilia was frozen, suspended in the space between denial and forced confession. The foundation she had so carefully built, now collapsing beneath her. The baby isn't yours, son, I said gently. It never was. What followed was the most gut-wrenching hour of my life. Judd's face crumbled. It wasn't just the truth about the child that unraveled him. It was everything. The gambling debts that had left him vulnerable. The manipulation that had kept him tethered to Lilia. The shame of his addiction turned into a weapon against him. Desperation colored Lilia's voice as she tried to salvage this situation. She spun a frantic narrative, said she'd been forced into the affair, that Cedric had exploited her vulnerability. But her words had no substance anymore. They rang empty in the air, collapsed under the weight of the proof lying on the table. You planned this, Judd said slowly, each word heavier than the last, his mind assembling the puzzle she'd hoped he'd never solve. You knew about my gambling problem. You encouraged it. I was trying to help you, Lilia insisted, but her voice faltered. By pushing me deeper into debt, by using my shame to manipulate my father into covering for your lies, he snapped. She had no answer, none that could make it better. And Marcus? Judd's voice cracked around the name, grief and disbelief merging. Did you seduce him too? Was he just another pawn in your game? It wasn't supposed to happen, she murmured. I was lonely, and he was kind. So you ruined his life too, Judd said, more accusation than question. Cedric spoke then, his voice heavy, deliberate. Son, I need you to know I never touched her. I let you believe I was having an affair because I thought maybe I could protect you from the consequences of your gambling. I thought I could shield you. Judd turned to his father, his eyes now filled with both sorrow and something else. Understanding, maybe even gratitude. Dad, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Cedric replied. You're my son, but I should have trusted your mother with the truth. I should have trusted you to be stronger than your mistakes. The unraveling was swift. That very evening, Lilia packed her belongings. Suitcases stood by the front door like monuments to a life built on falsehoods. She had nowhere to go, no family who would open their doors, no friends untouched by the lies she'd told. What about the baby? She cried as Judd loaded her bags into the car. You can't just abandon your grandchild. The baby will be just fine, I said calmly. I've already contacted Marcus's sister in Phoenix. She's agreed to take you in, help you get settled before the birth. You arranged that? For me? Lilia asked, astonished. I arranged for you to have a chance, I corrected. A chance to raise your child honestly, to rebuild without lies or manipulation. What you do with that chance, that's up to you. As her car disappeared down the street, I felt no sense of victory, no pride, only a profound sadness for all the pain that had taken place, and a quiet relief that finally the truth had been laid bare. 6 months passed, then a small envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a photo, a baby boy with dark, silky hair and Marcus's kind, thoughtful eyes. On the back, in Lilia's handwriting, were just a few words. His name is David. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Judd had begun attending Gamblers Anonymous. He faced his demons head-on, meeting his addiction with the same focused determination he brought to everything else in life. Cedric and I, after years of unspoken distance, found our way back to each other. Our marriage, once brittle with secrets, had grown strong again, strengthened not by perfection, but by truth. And then, 8 months after that fateful dinner, a new baby arrived, a real grandchild, born to parents who loved each other with honesty, a beautiful little girl with Judd's dark eyes and Sarah's contagious laughter. I've come to realize that the most profound victories don't come from explosive confrontations or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they're born from stillness, from truth told quietly but firmly, from forgiveness extended, not because it's easy, but because it's right. At 65, I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. It's never too late to fight for your family. And sometimes your greatest strength isn't rage or vengeance. It's the quiet, unshakable dignity of a woman who knows her worth and will never let it be stolen again. In the end, I didn't destroy Lilia. I simply took away her power to destroy us. And that made all the difference.